Today is July 23rd, 2026. I have Scott Horton of the Scott Horton Academy with me. Scott, how you doing today? Thanks for being with me again. Appreciate it.
Hi, thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Scott Horton Academy is the main site for you now, right?
Yes, sir. And in fact, I finally added the second half of my course on the new Cold War, and we just published also a brand new course by Grant F. Smith, who is by far the foremost American expert on the Israel lobby in the United States. He's written like 7 or 9 or something books about it. And he's got a great new course on the real history of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee ever since its founding back after the Second World War, or well, in the 50s, but it's so good.
Oh, very good. That sounds extremely interesting. That's definitely something I'm interested in. And
yep. In fact, promo code summertime, and everybody can save 20%.
Summertime. Okay. All right, great. Okay. Yeah, I have a grab bag of questions. I'm going to run you all over the place. I'm sorry about that, but I do have an APAC question for you. Now, just to refresh your memory here, Scott, I'm 10 years younger than you. You were born in 76. I'm 86. So not that far apart, but still not the same, I guess. Anyways, I told you previously, I am one of the crazies from the extreme right wing. I started listening to RBN back in my late high school, early college days and all that hoopla. We discussed it last time.
Yeah, I used to have a show in there in 05.
Right. And you were, for listeners that might not have caught the previous episodes, you were the first kind of gateway for me into the Oklahoma City story. And I know you filled in for Stat Miller a couple times, and you had JD Cash, because I've caught those, went back and caught those again recently in the past year. So
I should do that.
So yeah, that's my orientation. I've been around alt media, dissident politics for 2 decades now, and all the craziness that comes with it. So as I was sitting here thinking, well, I got to ask Scott this. You're one of the few people that I can get real specific with some of this stuff, and you probably know what I'm talking about. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't there some AIPAC spy scandal in the mid 2000s, the George W. Bush era? What happened there? I missed that, but I remember people talking about it years ago on Patriot Radio.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there was an Iran expert at the Pentagon named Larry Franklin. And forgive me, I forget if he was actually really part of the neoconservative set or not. Not all neoconservatives are Jewish. In fact, James Woolsey died yesterday. James Woolsey was a Presbyterian.
Okay, wow.
He was a card-carrying neoconservative.
Sure.
So there are Catholics and Presbyterians. Gene Kirkpatrick is another prominent one, but who are still card-carrying neocons, members of that set. So I forget now, forgive me, if Larry Franklin would really count as an actual neocon. I think maybe not. I think he may have just been a Pentagon Iran expert who sort of got suborned into Israel lobby shenanigans there. But he was very close to the neoconservatives, at least. And by the way, as crazy as it sounds, one of the best places to research all of this is the Washington Post. It's one of those things that they happen to have a little bit of a vested interest. You might even call it a little bit of a waspy neocon war going on there, a little bit like that. I'm not sure exactly the incentives, but the Post had, really good sourcing in the FBI telling them a lot of stuff about what was going on here. And I know I sound terrible when I say that, because people think like that can't be right. And this guy must be a plant. But like, just on this particular case, they happen to have an edge. I'm not saying only read them, but I'm saying it's a really good place to start. Funny as it may sound. Okay. But so Franklin passed top secret data, not just secret, but top secret on, let me make sure I have it exactly right. It was, I believe, discussions between Condoleezza Rice and President George W. Bush over what they were going to do about Iran. Right.
Okay.
So this is very, very high level confidential stuff. And Franklin gave it to Steve Rosen and Keith Weissman, the director and the right-hand man of the director at the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, to pass it on, obviously, to the Israelis. And he got busted, and the FBI caught him and arrested him at the train station in a made-for-TV movie type thingamajig, you know? And then they turned him state's witness. And, you know, Rosen and Weissman, I believe Weissman also flipped. And Rosen was the one who was tried. And he was the leader of AIPAC. He was the same guy who had given an interview to the New Yorker magazine when Jeffrey Goldberg, who's now the editor of The Atlantic, who helped lie us into war with Iraq, by the way, with tall tales about Saddam and Osama and chemical weapons. Lies, that is. But Jeffrey Goldberg at the New Yorker had interviewed Steve Rosen, and Rosen had told him, you see this napkin? By this time tomorrow, I could have 77 senators sign this napkin. In other words, do whatever he says.
Sure.
Sign anything he tells them to sign. And he also said, the lobby is like a night flower. It prospers in the darkness and shrivels in the sunlight. This is the leader of the lobby saying this.
Not
to Goldberg.
Reputation.
Yeah, Jeffrey Goldberg, for people not familiar, I mean, he's the editor of The Atlantic, and yes, as I said, he lied us into war, but he also served a major role sort of ostracizing anyone in mainstream media who dared cross Israeli lines, criticizing anything. And he would go, that guy's an anti-Semite, everyone. He's not allowed to be in polite company anymore. And then he'd never be published again, kind of thing. You know, he was, Justin Raimondo called him Commissar Goldberg. He would just go around, you know, accusing people falsely, mostly accusing people of anti-Semitism and ruining their careers and stuff. He's a real bad guy. But so they both felt comfortable enough publishing that in the New Yorker that, like, hey, this is how it works, basically, is we pwn your legislature. And now, so Franklin was convicted. I forgot if he flipped, man. He went to prison. I think he was the only one that went to prison, and Rosen and Weissman did not. Now that I think about it, this is all in 2004. So please forgive me, because 22 years.
Okay, good. Yeah.
And I didn't get a chance to prepare, but this is the best I can do from memory.
Yeah. I'm ambushing you here. So yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. But I did pretty good for off the cuff here, I think.
Yeah.
But that's about the sum of it. Was, you know, they're trying to get the measure of where Obama was. I mean, pardon me, where Bush was on whether to bomb Iran or not. And so that they could better try to, you know, tailor their position to fit with his to get them to do what they wanted, which didn't work, by the way.
Right.
And I could talk about why if you wanted to ask that.
Well, I've got a sort of a quick follow up.
Go ahead.
That may be related, may not be. Okay. So I was thinking back on all the wild stuff I used to hear back then. There was a story that I heard reported, and this may be kooky hallucinations from someone. I may be misremembering and confusing two separate things. What? Jack Abramoff on a yacht with Muhammad Atta? Was there anything to that? What the hell was that about?
Nah, that sounds like bullshit to me. Did that come from Daniel Hopsticker?
It may, but it was in RBN circles for sure.
Dude, those guys will believe anything, dude.
Okay.
You know,
sure.
They'll believe that Donald Rumsfeld shot a missile at the Pentagon while he was sitting in it. And he hit it with an A-64 Skyhawk. And he hit it with a Global Hawk. And he hit it with anything but the actual plane with Saudi back hijackers on it.
Right. I understand. Okay, so all right, you mentioned Bush in the Iran war. Now I've heard you. I've caught these little gems that you mentioned in your several shows that you've done with other people in the past year or so. Okay, so take me back to 2006, 2007. They do the surge in the Iraq war, And we're running out of time on the second Bush administration, right? The hourglass is quickly running out of sand, and they tried to jam in an action against Iran and get it going back then. And I remember that. I remember there was tons of saber rattling against Iran, and it really looked like that was the next thing. And so you went in and you described some of the backstory here. And was it George W. Bush himself that told the Pentagon no? Tell me that story again. Someone at the Pentagon or Bush shut it down? Relay that to me.
Well, no, it was they told him no. I mean, they
Pentagon
did not stomp their foot.
Told the White House no.
Yeah, I mean, so let me back up a second, okay? Well, I don't want to back up that far, but let's just say it like this. Iraq in 2003 was ruled by a secular minority dictatorship, the Ba'athist government. And there were Christians and Shiites and Kurds in the government, but it was dominated by the Sunni Arabs and their tribes. And that was where Saddam was from Tikrit. And so they were the dominant faction, but they were only 20% of the population. The Kurds are another 20%. And the Shiites are 60%, the Shiite Arabs. Now, as I said, some of them were included in the government, but mostly they were on the outs, and they're the oppressed super majority. So when W. Bush invaded in 2003, he was taking them to power. And by them, I mean whoever could clamor for the political leadership of the Shiite supermajority. And in this case, there were three main groups. Two of them, really all of them were backed by Iran to a degree, but two of them were really backed by Iran, and in fact had been living in Iran ever since the days when Jimmy Carter hired Saddam Hussein and gave him the green light to invade Iran in 1980. These were the guys who had fled to Iran and taken Iran's side and then fought even on Iran's side in the Iran-Iraq War. And the parties are called SCIRI, the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, which was run by the Hakim family. And then there was the Dawa Party, which was not so much a family clan, but it was a broader Shiite Islamist group. And these guys had been living in Iran, again, by that time for 22 years. 23. So W. Bush basically rides in and takes them all the way to Baghdad. Now, once he does that, it's a contest between America and Iran for who's going to have the most influence in Iraq. This is playing out to this day. They just put in a pro-American, or at least much more American-leaning Shiite businessman to be the prime minister. In fact, he's the first guy, I'm almost certain, he is the first prime minister since then who has not been a member of the Dawa Party or the Supreme Islamic Council. But of course, he's very close to them, and he's there with a compromise. When you think about Nouri al-Maliki and all the time that he was the prime minister of Iraq, that was after Ibrahim Jafari. They were both Dawa Party guys, and they were both there because the Americans and the Iranians compromised and agreed to allow this guy to be the prime minister. So much for Iraqi democracy. And so the Dawa Party, and anyway, so now it's 2006, as you says, and it's midterm elections, and the fight in the war, they never defined it. Let me tell you, you might remember this, but let me remind you. At the time on TV, they would go, well, it's America and the Iraqi people versus the terrorists. Duh. Oh, it makes me feel suicidal just thinking about the level of stupid in this. Like, no, what was happening was America was fighting on the Shiite side against the predominantly Sunni-based insurgency that was clinging for dear life to the power that they had. Right. And they were going to be on the outs no matter what, but they boycotted the election of 2005, which was a huge mistake. They were going to lose anyway, but they lost fucking everything by doing, sorry for cursing, they lost everything by doing it that way. And they were driven into insurgency because America was backing the super majority Shiite population to come and replace them, and literally ethnically replace them, or sectarianly replace them, to cleanse Baghdad, the capital city of Sunni Arabs. It went from, I believe, a 60% Sunni city to a 10 to 15% Sunni city, and that was just in the southwestern suburbs. But essentially, the Shiites had taken over the entire city, and America had helped them cleanse the whole thing. Well, especially in 2007. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But the point being, the reason that America had trouble in 2003, in 2004, in 2005, in 2006 is because we were fighting for the supermajority against a minority that had everything to lose and were, as you remember, driven directly into the arms of the bin Ladenites, who immediately adopted bin Ladenite tactics of suicide bombings, which had never happened in Iraq before, ever. And head choppings and all this stuff.
This was the black flag, the Abu Musab Zarqawi, right?
That's right. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. He was, in fact, not really a bin Ladenite. Colin Powell and all of them, W. Bush, they all lied that he was the connection between Saddam and Osama. But in fact, he had told Osama, I don't want to work with you. I want to kill the king of Jordan and just focus on that. Where bin Laden had this internationalist objective against the United States. And not only that, but he was hiding in Kurdistan, which was American protected territory up in the north of the country. And they had the gall to sit there and say, well, he's in Iraq. Yeah, defined very broadly, but the point being he was completely out of reach of Saddam Hussein to do anything about. And instead they lied and they put all these rumors that Saddam had given him healthcare treatment in Baghdad and had even given him a peg leg because he'd been wounded in battle in Afghanistan. And so there's the connection between Saddam and Osama, is they both backed this Zarqawi guy. Well, he had met bin Laden, but he was not a servant of bin Laden and had not declared loyalty to him and was not part of his group. And all this stuff about Saddam giving him a peg leg was a total hoax, a complete lie for your dad and your next door neighbor to believe, to help support this war and to build the consensus. And but anyway, once the war started, he of course immediately moved down into the fight. And I think he went to Mosul. I don't think he was ever in Fallujah. I think he went to Mosul and Ramadi and whatever. And he was absolutely leading gangs of marauders. And he was a much more sectarian type of a fighter than bin Laden. Bin Laden, I don't know the extent, like, depending on the opportunity, but he didn't seem to be nearly as much of a chauvinist against the Shiites as Zarqawi was, where to him, like, the only good Shiite was a dead Shiite. So he would send legions of guys to go suicide bomb their pilgrimages and, slaughter civilians by the hundreds and stuff, and try to build this apocalyptic sectarian war. And so the Sunnis were pushed into that insurgency, and America, I swear to God, I'm going to answer your actual question here. I'm working toward it.
Go ahead.
So this is W. Bush's frustration, right? Is because it's not the jungles of Vietnam, but still, he's not trying to fight a state army. He destroyed the state army with ease in 2 weeks, right? He's fighting an insurgency of just Sunni fighting age males who dare resist, and every house has an AK. So, I mean, what does that mean? That means that you have full-scale insurgencies in Fallujah, Ramadi, Mosul, Tikrit, and Samarra, and everywhere where there's lots of Sunnis. There's fighting going on in this huge coordinated thing, and backed by our loyal friends, the Saudis, to a great degree, by the way. And so Rumsfeld says we should cut and run. He puts it in terms of like a conservative critiquing the welfare state. At some point, you got to take off the training wheels and let them stand on their own. And Bush says you're fired and brings in Robert Gates. And Robert Gates is not nearly as ideological or bloodthirsty as Rumsfeld. He's more of a technocrat, but he's also sent there basically to help Bush fix the thing by the father. But instead of doing what James Baker recommended in his big commission of 06 and getting out of the war, Gates recommended that we double down. And he went with David Petraeus and Stanley McChrystal, who was at that time the head of JSOC, which is top tier Special Operations Command. And Petraeus, who had rewritten the Army's counterinsurgency manual with James Mattis, that said, no, those stupids in Vietnam didn't know what they were doing, but we do know what to do. It's clear, hold, and build. And we have this whole, vocabulary of acronyms and stuff that we came up with that says that we know how to do this. And so all we need is another 30,000 troops to surge into Baghdad to create peace and security in Baghdad, so then everybody else's political problems can be worked out in the parliament and in the democracy instead of fighting in the streets. So this was the policy that Bush announced in 2007, in January of 2007, and fired the general in charge, who I believe was Pace at the time. Forgive me if I screw that up. I think it was Pace, and replaced him with Petraeus. And by the way, for people not familiar, Petraeus is Army, Mattis is Marines, but their staff worked together to rewrite the counterinsurgency manual here. And Mattis did a lot to really give the insurgency a huge boost with his merciless attacks on Fallujah in spring and autumn of 2004, which just made everything so much worse and accomplished nothing.
That first, the Fallujah thing, correct me if I'm wrong here. This is that whole Fallujah and the raiding, going door to door, house to house. That started because there were 3 or 4 CIA contractors in a car that got killed, blown up, burned, and then they hung bodies from a bridge somewhere in that area, right? And then Bush decides, you know what, go in there and clean these bastards out, just wreck the place. And isn't that the genesis of all the Fallujah stuff? And they went back twice, right?
Yes, sir. And I promise I'm going to get back on track on the story, but this is a worthy diversion. Okay, so I don't know. You may be right. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but I can't verify the part about that they were CIA contractors. I know that they were Blackwater contractors. I don't know if they were working for Department of State or Defense or
I might
CIA.
be wrong. I might be shorthand. Just CIA.
I'm not suggesting that you are. I am only saying that I don't know for sure. I guess now on reflection on who they were working for at the time. I might have guessed DOD, but I'm not. I don't remember for sure. But in any case, I'll tell you what happened there. The old man, Sheikh Yassin, who had helped, who the Israelis had helped to create Hamas, they assassinated him in a drone strike in the Gaza Strip in March of 2004. And this, which, why I said January? Because in the story, this is what happened. In January, he said, I'm an old man and I'm going to die soon. And I hate all this fighting and I'm ready for a final peace deal and to recognize Israel. They don't want that, man. Just like they gave Arafat polonium poisoning, the Israelis don't want a partner for peace. And if the head of Hamas says he's ready to give in, they kill him. And so they did. And when they did, and it was in a spectacular fashion with a drone strike, and I forget now, but I think it was one of those, I think it may have been one of the first field tests of the drone that shoots the swords out the side. Instead of exploding, it shoots a bunch of swords out and cuts people to ribbons, the Lockheed thing.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure. And anyway, so I know a reporter who was in Fallujah at the time, and I can find this for you. I have the footnote somewhere. I can certainly find it. And it is, the reporter's name is Dar Jamail, Dahr.
Oh, yeah. I've heard him on Patriot Radio years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been on my show probably. And he's a leftist, environmentalist, whatever, American Arab, whatever guy. So like whether your audience identifies with him completely or not is not necessarily the point. But he was there and he saw what happened. That riot in Fallujah, where those Blackwater guards were murdered and then their bodies hung from the bridge and burned. That riot was in reaction to Israel's assassination of Sheikh Yassin.
Oh,
and they called themselves the Al Yassin Brigades, and they put pictures of them in their windshields. They held a big parade, and everybody was chanting about what a great martyr he was and how they were going to get revenge for him. And that was what kicked off the lynching of those Blackwater guards. And that was what kicked off, as you absolutely correctly recall, George W. Bush's order to James Mattis to go in there and clean them dirty insurgents out. And by the way, as long as we're at it, General Sanchez, who's, I'm sorry, I forget his first name, but he was the Army general in charge at the time. He wrote, it was supposedly a direct quote in direct block quotations. He, meaning he recorded it and later transcribed it. is he has George W. Bush's pep talk to James Mattis and the rest of them right before that initial invasion of Fallujah in 2004. And it is exactly what you would think in your drunkest, most depressed state. It's Bush ranting that we've got to go in there and save freedom. We got to go in there and beat the bad guys. We got to go in there and kick ass. Freedom is on the march. The bad guys cannot stand against us. Go in there and crush them. And like this total, because he's a cheerleader from college. That's his thing. He's the cheerleader. So he's telling the coaches, all right, coach, we cannot be stopped. We are democracy fighting against evil. Oh. And Sanchez is like ratting on the guy, saying, look at what a simpleton was in charge of this. How are we supposed to win when this is the guy giving us our orders? Was Sanchez's point when he transcribed that so-called, rant, that speech of W. Bush's. So anyway, yes, and that also, when they did that major attack on Fallujah, that was the first time that the third leg that I didn't mention yet, the third leg of the new Shiite alliance that took power, intervened, and that is Muqtada al-Sadr and his Mahdi army. Now, he did not flee to Iran. He'd been living in Iraq the whole time. His father was one of the founders of the Dawa party. And in fact, there's a huge Shiite slum in East Baghdad, or Eastern Baghdad, I guess you would say, where that was named Saddam City. But the day that the statue came down or whatever, right when he fled and went underground, they renamed it. The locals renamed it Sadr City and held up all these banners of the Ayatollah. And he's not an Ayatollah, but he's a religious cleric, and his father. And his father, who was martyred by Saddam Hussein. And so this guy, Sadr, had the most street credibility of any Shiite leader in the country. The Skiri and Dawa guys especially the Skiri guys, wore golden robes and had money and all of this stuff. But Sadr, had legitimacy. And in that initial fight in Fallujah in March of 2004, he sent pickup trucks full of Shiite fighters to go and help the insurgency in Fallujah. And then they attacked him. So that was the first time that they really, and I still remember I was over at my friend's house and I'm reading antiwar.com and I'm going, oh my God, they are so bad at this. They're fighting the Shiites now. And this whole time they've been at war. I mean, at this point it was 1 year into the war, but still 1 year into the war, we're fighting for the Shiites against the Sunni-based insurgency already. And then now look, they're turning around and they're fighting against the Shiites too. They don't know what they're doing. Or at least they're picking a fight with a guy who, unintentionally, that they had no ability to fight. So now, fast forward back to answering your actual question. Now, it's January of 2007, and the policy is not just we're surging into Iraq, but we're blaming everything on Iran. And they started out in the most nonsensical way that they did not go very far in blaming Iran for the Sunni insurgency. The same Sunni insurgency that was fighting like mad against Iran's actual friends on the ground, their Shiite militias, including Skiri's Badr Brigade, that America was backing and was even turning into the Iraqi army. And so this was one of those just insults to your intelligence, like Donald Trump telling you that Iran would have nuked America by now, or what, kind of just nonsense. And that didn't go that far. But then it turned very quickly to scapegoating Muqtada al-Sadr. Now, Sadr was an Iraqi nationalist. As I said, he was willing to work with the Sunni Arabs, and he was more of an Iraqi than a Shiite in his, rank of identities there, or much of the time anyway. And so even though he was allied with Skiri and Dawa as the sort of third leg on that stool of Shiite power, he was willing on numerous occasions to tell Iran and America to get the hell out and let us figure out the fate of our own country without you. So that left W. Bush in the position of having to choose. Does he want to support the rise of a leader who's going to marginalize Iran, but also marginalize the United States? Or is he going to continue to back the guys who are supported by Iran and who favor Iran in the hopes that he can bribe them with enough money and guns that they'll still favor America and sort of side with America over Iran's interests in the future. And so what did he choose? He chose to continue to back Skiri and Dawa and target Muqtada al-Sadr and accuse him of being the one who was the most backed by Iran. And there was a kernel of truth there, of course, which was, the Quds Force was training his guys and stuff like that, giving them some support. But they drummed up this entire propaganda campaign. I debunk it thoroughly in my book, Enough Already, but I'll do it for you right now, too. And this began, you could tell, it was in the beginning of 2007 with Dick Cheney and David Petraeus and Michael Gordon of the New York Times, who's now at the Wall Street Journal. And these guys had a conspiracy to lie America into war with Iran. And it was hilarious because at the time, and we joked about this at the time, it was like they totally forgot all that BS about the nuclear weapons program for like 8 months, for like a long time, because it was such a lie, a propaganda campaign anyway. When they weren't using it, they totally forgot about it. So they just forgot about it for a while. And they decided we're doing this instead. And this instead was, instead of their secretly making nukes, it's every time an Iraqi Shiite sets off a roadside bomb, Iran did it. And you and your audience have heard this 100,000 times. You still hear it to this day. It's one of the excuses for our current war. They'll say Iran killed 600 Americans in Iraq. But that's just a lie. One, they were killed by Muqtada al-Sadr's guys, Iraqi Shiites from Baghdad and Najaf and, wherever else, Karbala, I guess. They weren't killed by Iranians. There's no massive land invasion of Iraq by Iran fighting against American soldiers, even underground, even as an insurgency in Iraq War II. And if you listen carefully, that's not even the lie. The lie is 1, 2, skip a few. I'm pretending to believe that every one of these bombs came from Iran. And then somehow it doesn't matter who actually set the thing in the ground. And I don't even have to mention who set it into the ground. I'm just going to imply Iran did it. I'm just going to give Iran total responsibility every time an Iraqi Shiite working for Sadr sets off a bomb that kills an American. And it was obviously a hoax. And the reason that we know it was a hoax was because, one, let's start with their failure to prove they're positive. They were going to have a big press conference and lay out all the evidence. And Petraeus was going to demonstrate it all. And they laid out all the hardware and all the bomb remnants and whatever that was going to prove that all this stuff came from Iran. But then all the reporters started poking around and just looking at this stuff. And they had big stamps on it that said made in UAE or made in Haditha, which is a city in Iraq. And there was nothing there that indicated that this stuff came from Persia whatsoever. What's the evidence for that? There was none. And so the reporters started kind of gossiping about it and I guess raised enough of a ruckus before the press conference ever started that they closed the press conference down and they never even held it. And then the national security advisor of the United States, Stephen Hadley, who had been a lawyer that represented Lockheed and was tight with Dick Cheney and was, I don't know if he's a card-carrying neocon, but I think he was. He may have been one of those University of Chicago guys. But he was very close to them anyway. Believe me, no dove, Stephen J. Hadley, for God's sake.
Who wasn't a neocon back then? The entire establishment seems to me that they all.
Well,
were.
I like to be very specific with that terminology. So you're either a card-carrying actual ex-trot or ex-Democrat turned writer for Commentary Magazine, or you ain't. And that's a little bit too narrow, but only a little bit. There's only 100 neocons in the world. Let me have that discussion with you in a minute if you want. But on this point, all I'm saying is Stephen Hadley wasn't on the side of antiwar.com, okay? Stephen Hadley was forced to concede. As he put it, well, the evidence, we just didn't have it. Something very close to that, and admitted that there was no reason in holding the press conference because they didn't have the evidence to prove it. And this is months. This is like in May or June of the year, after months of these bombings. And now we know where Muqtada al-Sadr's guys learned how to make those bombs. They learned it from Lebanese Hezbollah. And Lebanese Hezbollah, they didn't learn it from Iran either. They learned it from the IRA. And the IRA learned it from World War II.
Hmm.
And so what we're talking about here is essentially more sophisticated, or at least more deadly form of IED. IED just means improvised explosive device. So most of the time when the Sunni insurgency was setting off IEDs, these were just old artillery shells and explosives of various kinds that were left over in Saddam Hussein's weapons stores that all went out to the black market with the invasion. All that stuff got raided. And so these would just be used as sort of homemade landmine, repurposed landmines, right? But the Shiites were manufacturing brand new munitions and with whatever explosives. But the technical innovation is it's a shaped charge with a copper plate across the top. And what happens is when the core explodes, it turns that copper plate into a speeding molten bullet that will cut right through armor. They're extremely effective, especially at tearing apart aluminum Humvees, but they're even somewhat effective against the MRAPs. I mean, they can be very deadly. And they did kill a lot of guys, including friends of mine and things. So, were killed by those things fighting the Shiites in East Baghdad. But the fact is, we know, and I can prove to you, and you can do the research and prove it to yourself, that through that whole season of the first half of 2007, the U.S. military, mostly the Army, but possibly even the Marines, but certainly the Army, found machine shops where local Iraqi Shiites were making these bombs over and over and over and over again. And you can read it in the Washington Post, in the Christian Science Monitor, and despite all of Michael Gordon's hype, Alyssa Rubin in the New York Times, his colleague, proved that he was blowing smoke when he says these must all be coming from Iran, because she was there when they, or at least got the Pentagon statement when they announced it. Yeah, we found another one of these workshops. And these are all in Sadr City, or they're in Najaf or whatever. There's not a Sunni for miles. These are clearly all local Iraqi Shiites who are doing this. And so they just totally obfuscate. W. Bush, I don't think this was the particular lie, but he had a phrase that he said. Someone called him out on lying about something. And he goes, well, I shorthanded it. And what that meant, which whatever, like, there's the honesty in that, right? Like what he's saying is he left out the real important part. He shorthanded it. Iran killed 600 of our guys. Translation: we assert that Iran provided the bombs that local Iraqi Shiites used to kill our guys, but we cannot prove that. And in fact, what we can prove beyond any doubt is that local Iraqi Shiites were making them instead. But now during this whole period, they were pushing and pressuring hard on W. Bush to launch strikes against IRGC bases inside Iran. And I can tell you, there's no question about this, that in January, February, March, especially of 2007, there were a lot of people in Washington who were very afraid that Bush was going to do it, including I interviewed a guy who resigned from the State Department in order to complain about it. I'm almost positive that was why he resigned from the State Department. His name was Wayne White. And he was warning, oh, we better not do it. Man, I should go back. There's a transcript. I should go back and read that Wayne White interview and see how right he especially, but both of us were. This is like in January of 2007 is when I first started doing the interview show as a full-time job on a daily basis in January of 2007. The first time I ever interviewed Gareth Porter about it and everything. But here's what happened. And we found this out only a couple of months later, I believe, in probably in March of 2007. This was published, I believe, by Joel Klein. He's the guy that wrote Primary Colors about Bill Clinton raping a black prostitute and paying for her abortion. He from Time Magazine, a good liberal Democrat, but a decent guy. He published a thing in Time saying that the chiefs took George W. Bush to the tank which is a skiff in the Pentagon. And they told him, Mr. President, we're happy to do the surge in Iraq. And we think it'll work, and you're right to do it, and fine. We're not pushing back on that. However, please don't make us go to war with Iran. And there were reasons why. You know what's funny about this is that was, in my memory, that was what really stood out, was Joel Klein's report that the Pentagon had sort of told W. Bush, sir, we highly request that you do not put us in this position, foresee, because of all of the difficulties in which we would encounter. Right? But I'm wrong about that, because in fact, I went back and found my old writings from 2005, where I'm citing reporting that's already coming out in 2005, at least, of the Pentagon telling Bush they don't want to fight Iran. And I'm already referring to some of that in my writings in 2005, that we know the military is telling Bush not to do it. And yes, I am that old. I just turned 50. Do
you have names in the Pentagon, in the military, that are telling Bush? Run those by me again if you have them.
It was the officers. It would not have been the civilian appointees. It would have been like the chiefs or their, top staff briefing the president. And here was the difficulty, okay? And I'm almost certain that it was from Klein's report is where I finally learned the term escalation dominance. And escalation dominance is the military's term for being able to control every stage of a conflict. So they can say, look, if, Mike Tyson rules, if you get into a fight, the other guy has a say. And so you're not going to be able to say that you can control step by step by step everything that's going to happen and make it happen exactly your way. Unless you have so many options that no matter what they do, you already thought of that and you already got them cornered, and they can't do that because you got them here and you got them here and you got them here. As Wolfowitz said about Iraq, Iraq is doable, right? It'll for various reasons, it'll be easy. So never mind all your reasons not to, right? And the Pentagon is telling W. Bush, here's the facts of life. One, we got 100,000 troops in Iraq, and you want to put even more in fighting for the Shiites against Sadr, but for the Badr Brigade, which you're turning into the Iraqi army. Now, if we attack Iran, then the Sadrists and the Badr Corps are all going to turn on our guys. It's going to be like Order 66, where the clones shoot all the Jedi Knights in the back. These are the guys that our guys on the ground are leading in war. And now you are going to launch a surprise attack against their best friends and allies next door. They are going to choose their historical allies over you. And that means Americans are going to die in huge numbers. And Bush goes, oh, you might imagine. He went, oh, I understand. Never mind. We also have, at that time, 50,000 troops in Afghanistan, I think. I should check my numbers on that, but that's the way I remember it. We're talking spring 07. I think we have 50,000 in Afghanistan. And not only that, we have however many tens of thousands of soldiers and unlimited, unquantifiable expense worth of equipment at bases in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Bahrain. And I don't think I knew back then we had bases in UAE and Oman, but they must have warned him, all up and down the Gulf, plus all those economic targets up and down the Gulf. And the thing about Iran is, unlike Saddam Hussein, remember Saddam Hussein, Jimmy Carter asked him, hey, invade Iran for us. And he was like, all right, then, because he had his own reasons, like fearing that Shiite supermajority. So he conscripted them all and sent them to war against Iran. But at the end of that, we'll skip exactly what happened, but he launched a war against Kuwait that resulted in America and allies bombing the crap out of his military force, and then staying in Saudi Arabia and continuing to bomb him for 10 more years after that. 12 more years after that. So by the time America invaded, his military was nothing. Well, now it's even 4 years after that, and Iran hasn't been at war since 1989. They have not been under total sanction. They did not get whatever they had obliterated in the spring of 91 or winter, early 91, as Saddam did. They have not faced. Iran is not doable. And so what have they been doing this whole time? Donald Trump likes to crow, well, we sank their Navy and blew up their Air Force and their hangars. Yeah, but so what? Their military was never focused around their Navy other than their speedboats. They had a couple of, meager cruisers or whatever, but those were all sacked at port. They weren't even trying. Like they're going to match Uncle Sam's Navy on the high seas. They're not even doing that. Their Air Force was made of F-4s and F-14s that Nixon and Ford had sold them. And so, and which were virtually all worthless due to lack of spare parts and things like that. So their military is not centered around their naval force or their airplane force. And their land army is essentially the militia, right? It's a 1 million man army, but it's just the people of the country. And they have no ability whatsoever in terms of wealth or equipment and logistics to field a land army, maybe into Iraq where they're welcome, into Eastern Iraq, at least, where they're welcome. But they're going to march across Jordan and Saudi into Israel and whatever? No. They're going to, hell, they could even sack Azerbaijan. I don't know. Probably not. I don't know. Maybe. But they don't have a land army that's built for invading countries with. Their land army is so that you don't invade them. Because you go, well, I don't know, boss. They got a lot of guys with rifles and it's too much for us to bear. What are we going to do? Force protection, man. So it's a deterrent only, their land force. So what's their entire military posture as we knew then? We're talking 19 years ago. This whole conversation's happening. It's centered around their short and medium and intermediate range missile capability. Not their nuclear weapons capability, which they're not working on, but simply volumes of medium range missiles. And the facts of life that W. Bush had to understand were Iran is too big for us to invade. We don't have enough airborne units to pour into Tehran. They got mountains everywhere. We have no land route in there. We're going to build up a 1 million man army in Azerbaijan as we're already fighting a war in Iraq. That's not going to happen. And it's 2 huge mountain ranges in the country. The country is 3 times the size of Iraq with 4 times the population. And they're not going to give in. And the option of a land invasion, I don't know if anyone even bothered telling Bush, forget that, because I doubt he ever even entertained the possibility for a moment, right? Like you just take one look at the map. We're not doing that. If America's going to invade Persia and conquer it and rule its capital city, it's going to take an effort like World War II. And as Daniel Davis pointed out to me, hey, it's flat plains all the way to Berlin from Normandy. It's not mountains. Even if we invaded with a World War II level effort, mass conscription of 10 million men, we still wouldn't be able to sack Tehran and control it. It'd be the world's worst nightmare. You're talking about, imagine some foreign army trying to take Colorado away from the Americans. It's not going to work. You're going to get shot, and that's it, And so forget that. So what are our other options? We bomb them. We make them very angry, but we have no way to control what they do. We have no way to eliminate. We drove Saddam into hiding after 3 weeks. We're not going to 4 or 5 weeks, whatever. We're not going to be able to do that in Tehran. So we can assassinate their leaders, but then they'll just appoint new leaders. We have no ability to determine the next day. So, and yet what we are doing then, if we attack, is we're opening up a huge front of a war where they can simply rain missiles down on our positions throughout the region in a way that we cannot defend from. And remember the meme, I'm sure you've seen, your audience has seen, where they say, oh yeah, well, if Iran isn't threatening us, how come they put their country so close to all our military bases? And it shows all the military bases surrounding Iran. And I would like, over the years, I'd like to point out that our government's actually, in a way, ironically doing us a favor by holding those bases there, because they're a tripwire for war potentially, but really more to the point, they're a tripwire against war. They're a real big reason why not to attack Iran. They clearly do not seek to start a war against us. But if we attack them, then all of that stuff is up for grabs. I mean, does anyone really believe that our defensive missiles amount to like a magical force field? It's simply a matter of volume. They have more interceptors than we have interceptors, dude. And look at what happened when Donald Trump called that bluff. They blew up every single base in the region. They've hit every single American base in the region. I'm not saying they completely obliterated every single one of them, but they bombed a lot of them. They hit radar stations in Jordan and from Erbil in northern, Iraqi Kurdistan, all the way down to the Gulf.
Billion-dollar radar
just exactly
systems.
As the military. I'm sorry?
Billion-dollar radar systems up in smoke.
Oh, yeah. Zillions. And plus economic targets all up and down the Gulf, desalination systems now, and chemical plants, and we'll never let's not get too far into the current, but just pointing out that this is what the Pentagon told Bush would happen. They said, we will not be able to control every stage of this conflict. Now, luckily, we don't have 100,000 men in Iraq or 150,000 men in Iraq, 50,000 in Afghanistan like we did then. And thank goodness that the Iranians have not attempted to target our army troops en masse in their barracks or anything like that. They're playing their cards very carefully because, quite frankly, they know that Donald Trump is loco. And if they, start just slaughtering huge numbers of American GIs on their bases, that could lead to him doing drastic things. And so I think they're, being very careful about how they apply their war algorithm here and who they hit and how. But you got a radar dome, they're going to reach out and touch it. And, they're doing everything they can in that way, and it's working. And so, and then, by the way, later in the year, the CIA put out their national intelligence estimate. Now, this is another thing you can find in my writings that I wrote at least 1 year before. I have a blog entry at antiwar.com called Release the Iran NIE and Hoekstra, who I think Hoekstra now is the ambassador to Canada. Did I read that the other day? And I forgot what the Hoekstra thing was about. But the first part of the blog entry was Release the Iran NIE. And this is at least 1 year before they released it. We already knew what it said, that Iran is not making nuclear weapons. And they stopped looking into it in 2003, and they have not made a political decision to begin making nuclear weapons since then. And they finally did publish that in November of 2007. And at that point, that was the very last hope for W. Bush that he would have the opportunity to launch the war in 2008, which I think he had already really, quite frankly, been talked out of. In fact, Ehud Olmert, who was the prime minister of Israel at the time, pushed him hard in, I'm going to say June. Yeah, I'm going to say June 2007. It's in the Guardian. Somebody check me. Guardian, almost certain, June 2007. Olmert says to Bush, attack Iran for me, and Bush says no. Oh, you want to know another funny story here? I love talking smack about David Wormser any chance I get. Gene Epstein formally challenged him to debate me at the Soho Forum, and he wouldn't even answer because he's such a coward. So everybody knows this is all his fault. But in May, I'm pretty sure May of 2007, David Wormser went to the American Enterprise Institute and started blabbing about how they had a plan to get Israel to attack Iran in the Gulf and they bet and hoped, force Iran to strike back at American targets. In other words, kill Americans in order to force George W. Bush to go to war against Iran. They called it the end run. Wow. Around George W. Bush. And this was originally reported by Stephen Clemens, who's sort of a center-left Democrat type think tanker from the New America Foundation. Not a fabulous kind of a guy. And in fact, I know him to be very dismissive of edgy type, concepts or whatever. He is not a peddler in sensationalism by any stretch. And then this same story was confirmed by the New York Times and the Washington Post. And their reporter, Barton Gellman, wrote a book about Dick Cheney called Angler, and he confirms the same story in Angler. So there are 3 different confirmations of this story, or well, 1 original report and 2 different confirmations of it. Maybe 3. I forgot. I think 2.
Hey,
that they were talking about.
Wormser was in that BBC documentary, The War Party. Him and his wife, weren't they? Or am I thinking of someone else?
Yes, his wife, Myrav Wormser, was the lady who ran Camera, which was where they would, take all of the worst of Islamic media and say this represents the consensus or whatever, or take, misquote things out of context and all that too.
That was
but
a
he
great
was the
documentary
principal author of The
time.
Clean Break.
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
That was a great documentary for the time. I think a BBC did it or some British outfit.
Yeah, I should go back and watch that. It's been a very long time since I've seen that. Yeah, Jim Loeb is in it. And yes, Richard Pearl gets the blame, and he should. But Wormser was the intellectual, academic type working for Pearl, who essentially was the brainchild behind the Clean Break strategy, and was the primary author of it.
Darkness, right?
I'm sorry?
The Prince of Darkness. Wasn't that his nickname around the Beltway?
Well, that's Richard Pearl.
Pearl, yeah, that's what I mean.
So this was Pearl's guy. Was Wormser, and he's the one who really came up with the strategy that said the best thing to do to weaken Iran would be to get rid of Saddam, and which of course was complete idiocy and completely backfired and only empowered Iran and led to so many consequences ever since then, such as W. Bush and Barack Obama trying to make up for their support for the Shiites by turning around and supporting the Bin Ladenites again, as Prince Turki. You know what? I don't think it was Prince Turki Al Faisal. I think it was Prince Saud Al Faisal. It wasn't Turki Al Faisal. It was one of these other Saudi princelings. But he said, listen, Daesh, that is the sort of English transliteration of the Arabic acronym for the Islamic State, ISIS, Caliphate, Daesh is how they would spell it. And so he just means ISIS or Al-Qaeda in Iraq. After Zarqawi was killed, they renamed it the Islamic State of Iraq. And then when it went to Syria, it was the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS. So, shit. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Yeah, let me jump in here. Now,
No, don't change the subject. Remind me what I was going to say. What was I talking about?
The latter years of the Iraq War, Wormser, not Fife, Richard Pearl.
Faisal, Turki Al Faisal. Yes, thank you. Turki Al Faisal says about ISIS, he says, our support for Daesh is our response to your support for the Dawa. Right. So because David Wormser gave the Dawa party Baghdad, now Saudi and America, especially under Obama, but beginning under Trump too. Pardon me, beginning under W. Bush, I meant to say. Beginning under W. Bush and then into Obama, America and all the allies go back to backing the Bin Ladenites as long as they're fighting against the Shiites, because David Wormser personally put Iran up 2 pegs in Baghdad. So now we got to try to take them down a peg in Damascus. And that was the reason that they built the caliphate, which then blew up into such a fantastical, ridiculous thing that they had to launch another war for the Shiites to blow it up again in Iraq War III, the war that Obama started in August of 14 and Trump ended in, I guess, the very end of 18.
Okay, so David Wormser and the end run around Bush. Now you've had interviews with Seymour Hersh. Didn't he write about a plot that Dick Cheney came up with about machine gunning Marines in the Persian Gulf and blaming it on Iran? Or am I misremembering something here?
Yes, that was right around the same time. I mean, that's a bit more Hitlerian, right? Like using your own guys to attack your own guys. And so, I don't know. That was a story that he published at the time. As I say, the other version of it was that they would just have Israel start the war and essentially bet that the Ayatollah would hit and kill Americans, and that then Bush would have to respond, would have no choice but to go ahead and escalate the war against the RGC bases inside Iran.